Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show. This is a show that is about what its name says, Revolution Nothing Less. I'm here today on November 10th, 2020. This is the 33rd episode of our show. My co-host, Sunsara Taylor, is in New York City. She's been on the East Coast during this election time. And later on, I'm going to be joined by Luan as we introduce the different segments of today's show. This has been a week that's just extraordinary. In fact, trying to keep what happened each day in mind is even difficult because months were packed into every day. We began the week with the election a week ago Tuesday, and that night is the first time we did a 5.5-hour live broadcast from here, the RNL studio, in association with Refuse Fascism, and I co-hosted that with Coco, who co-authored with me the pledge to the people of the world from Refuse Fascism, which appeared as a full-page ad in the New York Times just yesterday. And we're going to be interviewed by Sunsara Taylor later in this show, and we're going to be talking about the import of that pledge. Also, we're going to show from our 5.5-hour broadcast a few interviews, one with Sarah Atkins, who's with Torah Trump's Hate, an anti-Trump group of Orthodox Jewish young people. Also, I'm going to be speaking with Joshua Shanes, who's a professor at the College of Charleston, who's done a lot of study of fascism and the Holocaust in Germany and applies that to today. It's an interesting interview. We'll have part of that interview on here. And then first of those interviews will be with Jared Yates Sexton, who's a professor in Georgia. He's got a large Twitter following, a lot of which is about the Trump-Pence regime, and he's also a novelist and has done a recent historical work. You'll see that later on. But as I said, this is a show about revolution, about preparing today for the time when we can make a revolution. And those of us who produce the show have put a lot of energy over the last month or two to focusing on the necessity to drive out the Trump-Pence regime. And we're drawing very heavily from it. In fact, the whole show is based on the method, approach, and development of the understanding, the scientific approach to communism developed by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. And a lot of what we've been doing has been drawn from his August 1st statement on the situation we were facing going into the election, which is absolutely today repays your careful read. You can find it on revcom.us. And I just want to say before beginning, go to revcom.us, because as we are facing a situation of many people having to come to grips with what it meant that 70 million people voted for Trump after all we've been through, deep questions are posed. Where did this all come from? How did this develop? What's the fundamental root of it? Why is fascism developing all over the world? What's its particular physiognomy, which means the face of it, the way it's structured here? This is all work that he's been doing he being Bob Avakian, doing over the last 30 years. You need to read that and learn about it and engage it. There's films, there's written work, and then it's a more fundamental analysis of the system we live under. And he does it in a way that's very up to date. Coming off of current events, he's able to expose the dark forces, the deeper forces, causes, and the solution, which is what we're all about here. Humanity is capable of far more than this world. So, as I said, though, we've been focusing quite a bit on the fascism, and now we're in a situation where the people danced in the streets, and rightly so, on Saturday after it was declared by the Associated Press and the other networks followed suit that Biden had won the election. And at the same time, we're facing this Republican fascist party saying, no, we're following Donald Trump, at least right now, in saying that he won, and he is already filing lawsuits and trying to rile up his followers on this. And we cannot allow him to overturn this election. And so we're going to be doing a number of things on that in this show and subsequent shows to see how this plays out. And we're not going to give him any quarter to be able to do this. Masses of people do have to take to the streets this coming weekend in a call from Refuse Fascism to really say, no, you're not going to continue stealing this election. You guys need to go, and in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. So that's where we're coming from. You're going to hear, as I said, a lot of different things from that, including our first, before I get to our first episode, we're also going to conclude with a song that a revolutionary rock band prepared for and wrote and put together for this moment, and we've played it before. It's called America Goddamn. And during this show, I just want to mention too, we're going to play a clip from the film that Bob Avakian did in 2017, The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible. And this clip is on what's behind this fascist movement of the Trump-Pence regime. Where did it come from? So that's a very important clip, and it's very prescient and speaks to a big question that people have now. But we're going to start today's show with sights and sounds from the celebrations that took place on Saturday when Biden's victory was at last announced after 4 days of suspense. So why don't we go right to that?
I feel great, man. I feel really good. It's like a relief, you know? There's so many things going on in the world, and America is a historic day, man. Just grateful to be out here with all these people. All we want is a change, man. That's all we want. Feels good, man.
Trump, pack your shit! You're illegitimate! Trump, pack your shit! You're illegitimate! Then what are we doing, Trump no more? Stay in the streets and make him go! Fuera, 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 Donald Trump! Fuera, 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 Donald Trump! Fuera!
Today was a huge victory. It was a huge victory, and we're one step closer to getting that orange pile of shit out of the White House. But look, the worst thing we can do right now is go back to sleep. The worst thing we can do right now is say that this is over and that we're done and that we can go back to our normal lives. There's many people that because of this regime are never gonna get their normal lives back. But we have to continue to be in the streets because those fascists are going to continue to be in the streets. They want to dominate the streets with their pigs and their brutality and their force. But you know what they don't have? They don't have right on their side like we do. We have truth on our side. We have right on our side. And we have the one thing that they don't have. And it's all you beautiful people that actually give a fuck about humanity. That actually want to fight for real liberation. They don't have that. And I'm saying that to say because we have to look to each other. We have to continue to call on more people. It was beautiful, the outpouring of today, but we have to double, triple, quadruple that shit, and day after day, non-stop until they are fucking gone. That the man in the orange posters is not just a good sentiment. We are determined to get those motherfuckers out the White House. And that's gonna take massive, sustained, nonviolent protests in the streets. When he says no and he keeps filing lawsuits, we have to continue to be in the streets. When he calls on his supporters to get out in the streets, we have to get out into the streets in nonviolent protests, demanding Trump Pence out now.
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist fascist America. Trump, Pence, out now.
Okay, so that was sights and sounds from Saturday after the election of Joe Biden to be president, and I think you could see the feeling of joy that people had, of feeling that heavy rock lifted from their necks, and their righteous celebration, which we share, even as we recognize the danger that could still lie ahead, and the fact that the roots of this fascism still exist and the movement itself still exists. I'm here now with Luan, and we're in our studio, and we're getting ready to present to you the rest of the show.
Yeah, so next we're going to be having an interview between Andy and Coco and Sunsara that actually happened today, and it's going to be speaking on the ad that was published in the New York Times yesterday, the Refuse Fascism Pledge of resistance, and they're also going to be speaking on the moment. So let's go see that.
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The Trump-Pence regime must go. We will speak, we will stand, we will shout and march together every day. We pledge to stop a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. We will take to the streets day after day and call forth others. We demand Trump, Pence out now. We will not stop until they're gone. We do not comply with a regime putting targets on the backs of our precious Black and brown and indigenous peoples, denying women control of their bodies, forcing our precious lesbians and gays and bisexuals and trans and queer people back into the closet. We do not accept a society ruled by hatred and bigotry, ignorance and brutality, demeaning and cursing other peoples and countries and threatening them with destruction.
On Monday, November 9th, a full-page ad with a pledge to the people of the world was placed in the New York Times by refusefascism.org. It was signed by Chuck D, Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Lily Wachowski, Arturo O'Farrill, Jodie Sweetin, and a host of other public intellectuals, prominent artists, and public figures. And it is a call to people of conscience to act in this moment. It was co-authored by Andy Z, who's the co-host of the RNL show, and Coco Das, both of whom are members of the editorial board of refusefascism.org, as am I. So I'm very happy to have them all on Zoom to talk a little bit about this ad With me here today, Andy, Coco, welcome.
Hi, Sunsara. Hi, Andy. It's good to be
Hi,
here.
Coco, from the
Hi.
south, and Sunsara, not here with me in the RNL studio, but in New York City. Glad to be here.
It's good to be with you virtually. It's especially right now with this ad that just came out, and I know that when we produce this, we're gonna share a reading of that. So people have just heard this, but I think it'd be very good. Maybe we could just start, Coco, with you to talk a little bit about what's been the reaction and the response to this ad being placed, to the content, to the pledge. What kind of responses is this generating?
Well, I think overwhelmingly the response has been really positive. And, you know, this part of why we wrote this was to be a wake-up call. In this ad, you have, in this pledge, actually, you have the reasons, all the reasons why this regime has to go, and actually how we have the power and responsibility to act in this moment and to demand that the regime must go and drive this regime out. And so I think we got more than 1,000 new signers yesterday. Oh, some of the comments we've gotten is like, you know, I want to go get this and frame it so that I can look at it in the future and, you know, pass it down to people in the future. And, you know, I saw one comment today that said, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this, which I thought was, you know, I'd like to know more about what this person meant by that. But this is something really profound, hitting the pages of the New York Times, the newspaper of record, at a time of, you know, on the one hand, you had jubilation over Biden winning the election, you know, the media announcing that Biden has won the election on Saturday. And on the other hand, right today, just a few minutes ago, I saw that Pompeo said, we are going to have a smooth transition to a second Trump term. And what a nightmare that will be for humanity. So in that mix that this ad landed at a turning point in history and at a moment of great danger and great possibility, and that the people actually have to be a part of deciding what kind of future we're going to have. It's been very profound. I mean, it's been shared, not only, you know, shared on social media by signers of the pledge, but also hundreds and hundreds of other people who are really connecting to the words in the pledge and to the momentousness of what is happening, what we're living through right now.
So I actually just wanted to pick up on a point that you were just making, because it's interesting. The day that the pledge came out, I wanted to read the front page of the New York Times. It says, Biden turns his attention to transition while Trump refuses to concede defeat. And I wondered, Andy, if you wanted to say a little bit more about this. Pledge was written before the election. It was a call and a moral call to conscience. It's very poetic. It's a very profound statement that was true then. And for many people, they think, well, the election happened, Trump is over. And yet this was published just a couple days after that announcement of Biden's victory. And why was that important to still publish, in your view? How do you see this in this moment?
Well, I think as it turned out, it was very important to have it appear on Monday. I have to be honest, it wasn't necessarily our intent. We've been trying to get it published for the the week when the actual election took place. And this is what you just expressed, Sunsara, the contrast between the reality that Biden has won and the election. Clearly, he's won the Electoral College votes. It's indisputable, actually, about that in terms of the count and in the different states, these outrageous lawsuits. And then on the other hand, here's the declaration that they're not going to accept it. And so that this pledge that pledges our determination to prevail over a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. Is very important that it came out, as Coco said, going through all the features of this fascist regime, what they were bringing down on the people, reminding people of that, and what it would be to have to live under this. And we're in a situation where Biden won. he won the election. You know, and these people have to get over that, and we got to move on to something different. But they're not ready to move on, and for, you know, we don't know all the reasons, but it's actually a perilous situation potentially in all of this. And so I'm very glad that the ad came out when it did, and given the, you know, the wonderful celebrations that took place, which we're going to be showing people some of a little bit later in the RNL show. That people accomplished a lot. They went up against so much to organize, to go out and vote, up against voter suppression, intimidation, lies, innuendos, robocalls, all of this. And when Biden won, it was like just a burden was lifted off of people's back, and they danced in the streets, as they should. But then at the same time, we face a situation where not only is it's not just Trump being petulant about this or self-absorbed, but it's actually an entire regime that's standing behind him. And he still is in power, okay? And he has a lot of levers at his hands, and he has a mass movement that he's threatening to actually mobilize around this. So that there is still a danger here, which is why Refuse Fascism is called a protest for this coming Saturday. But speaking to the pledge itself, you know, that headline that says, a pledge to all the people of the world in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The Trump-Pence regime must go. And that was actually very glad that that was the must go is in the headline, because that still remains the task. They're still in power. He can do a lot of damage, even should they concede. He can do a lot of damage to unravel things between now and the inauguration of President Biden. He can do tremendous damage. Plus, they're gathering their forces. They're going to make, you know, Newt Gingrich, this advisor to Trump and arch conservative fascist, you know. Anyway, I'm not going to get involved in cursing Newt Gingrich, but he did say that, you know, the Trump-Pence regime, the 2016 to 2020 will be seen as a turning point in American history, and that 2020 could become the rallying cry of a stolen election from the Republicans, right, from Trump, and be used to coalesce their movement going forward. So in any event, there's a serious threat, but we have to be very clear that people won a great victory in voting out Trump. And they have to stand on that victory and not allow these people to overturn the election. This is very important. And yes, Refuse Fascism, we're sounding the alarm, we're calling people into streets, and the pledge itself gives people all the reasons. And it says the future of humanity hinges on this. So it's a time to celebrate, but it's a time to not let down our guard. And in fact, we need to get mobilized right now off of this election and be ready for, should they continue this course, which they very well might, and it's not impossible for them to even prevail. And if they start to do that, we're going to have to really be in the streets fighting very hard for out now. And then that will be, this is subverting every norm of elections and any sense of fairness that the people face right now. And that'll become a very sharp battle should they start to prevail. They have no goddamn case for this, to be just clear. Well, they have a little bit of a case, though, or a case that they can make and not prevail according to the law as it is. But that has never stopped a fascist regime, let alone this one. So it's a very complicated situation. It's important that this pledge came out now so that people are considering that this isn't all just over and we're going back to normal. No, there's no normal here. The country is sharply divided, became more divided through this election, and now we've got to see that this regime is removed from power and then go forward and struggle from there.
Yeah, I was just going to read towards the end of the pledge, because I do think there's a lot packed into the words, and actually the more you return to it, the more it gives shape to a lot of what people really feel in their hearts that they're sick of, that they want to see ended. A lot of what they were in the streets dancing to see lifted. But there's also, it's forging a will and setting standards of what needs to be done. And I think it holds up in the wake of the election quite well. It says, here and now, we pledge to unite in our millions, rising together in nonviolent resistance to stop a great horror. We pledge to stay in the streets, overcoming fear and uncertainty until this American fascism is brought to a halt. And this fascism is still on the move very much, even as they've suffered a defeat, and that's very important as well. I wonder, Coco, you and Andy were the authors of this pledge, and it is a pledge. And I think it is true that it's summoning people to act. It's saying we will stay in the streets, and there is a great import in refusefascism.org. We are calling for protests this Saturday and for people to stay in the streets. There's a need frequently for calls to political protest, but this is not that per se. It's a pledge, and it's very poetic. It's written in a certain way. It's been signed by a number of artists. It was, I forgot to mention, the graphic design was beautifully done by the artist Shepard Fairey. A lot of people were involved in this as a pledge that serves a different kind of a role. Why did you feel it was important to do a pledge in this case?
I think in any momentous movement for justice or for social change, the role of art, the role of poetry and giving poetic voice to the hopes and dreams of people is really very important. And we have written very stirring calls to action, but to have it, the thing about poetry is how it can distill such big ideas into, a few lines, a few words, and to be able to do that in, one page, just with a lot of white space around it, I think is very important. It allows people to connect actually to the ideas in a different way. And it does reach out to broad sections of society. We need every corner of society in this struggle to stop this American fascism that does imperil the people of the world and the earth itself. That is not an exaggeration. And it is going to take the youth, the intellectuals, the musicians, the artists, the lawyers, teachers, everybody getting into this movement together. And I think there's a distillation in that with this pledge, with the breadth of people that have signed and put their name on this, and also in the way that it makes this call, the way that it calls out to people. It's a very visceral, very human way to bring people into back to their humanity. One thing that fascism does is it degrades everybody's sense of morality, as you are forced to accept what you never thought you would accept. So, Andy and I were talking to one of the signers, Lily Wachowski, and she was saying how the poetic voice of the pledge really, really reminded her of our shared humanity. And, she's also written very, very poetically herself about this in Lit Hub, and about unleashing our radical imagination and world building, the importance of building this world, of actually what it could look like, to not accept this, and to actually struggle for a whole different future, where humanity can thrive, where we actually keep a promise to the people of the world. And we claim our humanity along with everybody else, the 7 billion on this planet, who the president of this country can actually destroy. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Andy, if you want to add anything to that, or if there's anything else you want to touch on in this moment, and with how this pledge connects with this moment.
Well, first, I just want to, I think Coco put it really well. And when we decided to do a pledge, we were looking at that things were really going to come to a head this fall. And we also had to recognize that many people, we had just come off that beautiful uprising actually against the police murder of George Floyd. And yet people weren't really seeing the danger. I mean, everybody should just take a minute and imagine, had Trump won this election, what we would be facing. It's almost unspeakable. You see what they're doing now, having clearly lost. Imagine had they won. it would have been a tremendous horror show. But we had to actually wait. We had to, I'm not going to, I can't say it better than Coco. We had to return people to their humanity, return them to all that had happened over the last 4 years, what they'd been learned to not accept in their deepest soul, if you want to put it that way, but accept as part of the reality that they're going to try and live through, and also concentrated because of the pandemic and the utter disregard for people's lives at the expense of the regime, and so such that the Republican Party and their followers almost became a death cult, and at its core really was that. And so I just want to echo what she said, and one more point I want to echo is that this is not just something that Coco and I wrote and then people put their name on. I mean, there were obviously 1,000 people did last night, but Lily and Arturo and Cornell, different people, this was a process where people really did some soul searching in terms of putting this out into the New York Times. We wrote it months ago, but people really had to wrestle with this. So I think the thing maybe just to add to this is that, you know, the pledge is written earlier, and it calls for out now and people to take to the streets day after day. That was very necessary in the fall. It might be necessary again right now. Right now, I think what we really need to do is get people out in massive numbers on Saturday to say we don't accept this stealing of the election, this overturning of a clear mandate and victory for Biden, which does have to be certified. It is not certified until December. Actually, it's not even, there's even another date in January. And we need to be able to sound the alarm to people to understand that it's not over until he's out of the White House. I don't know that we need to, you know, we'll have to see that people are going to be in the streets every day in massive numbers. I kind of think that's probably not what's going to happen, or even exactly what we're going to call for. We should be mobilized in such a way that we can take to the streets at each turn, and it might be necessary to do that. It very well could be. If he starts with these rallies and it starts connecting and people are, these fascists with their caravans are mobbing the streets and courts are starting to find in their direction and it's going to the Supreme Court, then all bets are off and we have to really mobilize. But so that's one thing I wanted to say. I also have to say, the day after the election, the crew of the first several signers on that call, we had a very heavy day. I mean, one of the heaviest days I ever remember, where people who knew what this was were punched in the gut. That half of America said, yeah, I'm okay with concentration camps. I'm okay with tearing children from their parents. I'm okay with white supremacy. I'm okay with a pussy grabber who is going to ban the right of women to control their own bodies. I'm okay with all that, because for whatever reason that they had, which fundamentally meant that the reason was that they agreed enough with that to say it was okay. So we were people were very, very upset about that. Now, we have our plan for struggle going forward, but I think we also have to look deeper at what are the reasons behind this? Where is this white supremacy coming from? Why did fascism take root in this country so profoundly? Why is it still here even now? After they lost the election, you're seeing the mobilization of the entire Republican Party. He's changing people in positions in the government. It should be cut and dry, but it's not. There's deeper reasons for that, and that's something that, you know, speaking for myself and I think others on the editorial board, we went into this deeply. Many of us looked at the work of Bob Avakian, which people can find on revcom.us, that goes very deeply into the causes, the roots of the white supremacy, the roots of the patriarchy, how that's woven into the system. I'm not going to go into explaining any of that, but it really encouraging people to go there. And actually, one of the things that contributed to the pledge itself was a statement Bob Avakian made on August 1st on the acute situation we face. And whether people agree or disagree with our solution to that, which is the new communism he developed and a revolution when that becomes possible, and preparing for that now, whether you want to, you believe in this system, there is some very important insight in that piece. And of course, speaking for the RNL show and myself, I want to encourage people to see the deeper problems in the system itself and what it's going to take to get a system where humanity could truly flourish. But that's an ongoing conversation and discussion and debate and political work we have to do. So for right now, people have to have their eyes wide open at what could be, what's developing with his refusal to accept the results of the election. Even as we stand firm that Biden won, we were right to celebrate and get off the stage, Donald Trump, and go back to your golf courses, crawl under a sand trap or whatever else you got to do. And then we're going to have to go forward and continue the struggle around this fascist strain in America and what America has done. That's from my perspective. But those are things that I would just want to add. And I want to underscore for people that Refuse Fascism is an organization of people from many different political points of view, and any struggle it advocates is for nonviolent, sustained struggle of the masses of people to drive out the regime. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, and our shared humanity is what brings us together.
Well, listen, ending back on our shared humanity, I think I really want to thank you guys for talking about this. It's silly to say to Andy for coming on the RNL show, since you're always on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. But thank you, Coco, for coming on the RNL show. And thank you both for having this conversation. I do want to encourage everybody, if you haven't yet, and even if you have, go to refusefascism.org, read the pledge to the people of the world, read it out loud, and actually work those words and that commitment. It is a pledge. Make that pledge. Join in making that pledge. Join others in making that pledge and spread it. Donate to it. It needs to get out. Share it broadly. And I'm going to be broadcasting this on my radio show on WPFW and maybe some other stations so that we get the word out more about this. And it's just really wonderful to see you both from afar. It's been too long, and there's so much love in this, and I really love you guys always, but also for putting this together. It means a great deal. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunsara. Thanks, Andy.
And thank you, Coco. Thank you, Sunsara. And we're not done. So let's. Anyway. I just really agree with everything you just said.
Me too.
So that was the conversation that our host just had along with Coco Das on the situation, and people should really pay attention to what was being said because the situation is changing extremely rapidly. Next up, we're going to be having a clip from the film of a talk called "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the Name of Humanity, We Refuse to Accept a Fascist America. A Better World is Possible." And this was a talk given by Bob Avakian, and we want to show a clip from this because a lot of people are asking now, how did we get here? And this clip goes into what actually came and brought about this American fascist movement in the U.S. today. So let's take a look at that.
We are we are now being ruled by a fascist regime. And here is the shorter story, the more particular reasons why things have come to this crossroads in this country with potentially disastrous consequences for human beings everywhere. The USA is a country which established its territory and built the foundation of its wealth through the armed conquest of land, genocide, slavery, and ruthless exploitation of successive waves of immigrants to America. And it has continued as a country marked by white supremacy, patriarchy and male supremacy, and other oppressive divisions, while expanding its domination into an empire stretching across the globe, sitting atop a lopsided world of profound inequalities and plunder of the environment. It would take the resources of nearly 5 Earths for the rest of the world to have the kind of consumer society that exists in the U.S. All this backed up and enforced by a massive machinery of death and devastation, the U.S. military, and reinforced with a constant barrage of ideas and culture, rationalizing and justifying all this oppression and destruction, propagated through an equally massive machinery of molding public opinion. Today, while the U.S. is, and loudly proclaims itself to be, the world's #1 superpower, it is riddled with sharpening contradictions and facing growing challenges within the country and internationally. And this has brought forth a fascist regime that now holds the reins of power with the finger of a demented bully on the nuclear button. A regime that, without exaggeration, threatens not just greatly heightened suffering for the masses of humanity, but the very existence of humanity itself. So this poses sharply the immediate urgent challenge we face. The truth, another terrible truth that must be faced, is that in the context of profound and acute contradictions that are asserting or reasserting themselves in ways that are tearing at the very fabric and deepening cracks in the foundation of this country, at the same time as the American empire is facing serious challenges internationally, fascism is one possible resolution of this, on the terms of this system and its ruling class, even as this is a horror for humanity. While the Constitution does establish the separation of church and state, and the Christian fascists are wrong or simply lying when they insist that the founding documents of this country established it as a Christian nation, the reality is that Christianity has all along been the unofficial state religion of this country, and the country's identity throughout its history has been as a white Christian nation, grounded in male supremacy as well as white supremacy, and driven by a manifest destiny to dominate not only the continent of North America, but ultimately the world as a whole. All this has been brought into question and has become the focus of intense struggle going back to the 1960s, and in some important ways, back to the Civil War. And while developments internationally, including the demise of the Soviet Union, have given further impetus to the globalization of the capitalist world economy, this very heightened globalization has propelled changes that have sharpened contradictions within the U.S. as well as on a world level, particularly with an emerging capitalist China mounting a challenge to U.S. global economic dominance, at the same time as this heightened globalization, under conditions of Western imperialist domination, has wreaked havoc in countries throughout the Third World, including the Middle East and other places where Islam is the prevailing religion, adding fuel to a virulent Islamic fundamentalism that has declared war on the decadent West and on infidels and others oriented toward the West and facilitating its imperial domination. In order to bring about any positive resolution to all this, even short of abolishing and moving beyond this whole system, it is necessary and crucial to break with the normal routine and the normal workings of the political process.
So that was Bob Avakian from a talk he gave in 2017. If you go to the website, revcom.us, there's 2 other clips from that film right up on the homepage. Next, we're going to go to 3 segments of 3 interviews we did in our live broadcast on Election Day with Jared Yates Sexton, Joshua Shanes, both of whom are professors, and from Sarah Atkins, who's from the group Torah Trumps Hate. So let's go to those excerpts now. So Jared, as I said, is speaking to us tonight from Georgia, a very critical state in this election, and one that's been highly contested. And we're going to see what happens there. And as I mentioned before, he's a professor of literature and English. He's written a couple of novels, short stories, and his latest book is called American Rule: How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. And sometime soon, I'm looking forward to discussing that with you, which is, I think people should read this because it gives you a lot of the ideological roots of what we're experiencing right now. We'll have a chance some other time to really sit down and talk about it. I've read the book at this point. So, but I'd like you to talk to people about how you see the stakes of this election and what you think, really sort of what's happening now. Put it that way. What are we facing?
Well, I'll just say that this isn't Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. This election is a referendum on fascism. Whether or not this country wants to embrace it, jump in with both feet, and live in a fascist society where white supremacists and aristocratic corporatists control everything to the detriment of the majority of the people. And, that we plunge headfirst into a future climate catastrophe that will be run through with fascistic behavior, the mistreatment of refugees, and more or less the rise of a corporate nightmarish dystopia. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's not an exaggeration. What we're watching right now is whether or not we are going to stare into the abyss that Donald Trump and the Republican Party represents right now, or if we're going to turn away and find something real and human. I think those are the actual stakes of this election.
I was wondering if you, being in Georgia, you get a different picture than possibly people have, certainly than out here in California. But although there's plenty of Trumpites out here too, all in Orange County, but particularly on the question of a big linchpin of his fascist program is white supremacy. This is you and I once talked about. There is a line directly from the Confederacy to what we are facing now under the Trump-Pence regime. So I was wondering if you could talk about that for a second, just give people a sense of that.
Well, I just want to start by saying that Georgia right now, so all of this conversation about whether or not Georgia will turn blue in this election, we should have a Democratic black female governor right now. That election was stolen by Brian Kemp. And people need to understand that one of the things that's happening is that these old Republican strongholds are starting to crumble. The demographics show us that everything is shifting, that the balance of power is shifting. And one of the things that we see, and we don't understand the Confederacy and how it actually worked. We don't teach that. We don't learn that in this country. And what the Confederacy was about, besides protecting slavery, was about looking at demographics and looking at political power and realizing that the South was not going to hold a stranglehold on American power anymore in the 19th century. And so as a result, what did they do? They started, swimming in conspiracy theories. They started attacking democratic institutions. They started narrowing their power and focus, and they created a proto-fascistic state in the Confederate States of America. What we're watching now with Trumpism is an echo of that. It's the Confederacy with colorblind rhetoric. They'll say that they're not racist, then America is fair, and I'm the least racist person you've ever known. But the entire underpinning of Trumpism is white supremacy and weaponized nostalgia, and all of that equals out to fascism. And again, the Confederate States of America was a proto-fascistic country. I just want to say really fast that what we're seeing with the results equals out to exactly what you're saying, which is this is the feared moment I believe that a lot of people were worried about, which is this is going to be close enough. And I do believe that Biden will outpace Trump in the long run, but it's going to be close enough that Donald Trump is going to be within striking distance to try and undermine the democratic will of the American people. And I think that we are looking at a situation where we're probably going to need to be in the streets. I firmly believe that at this point. But I will just, to put a cap on what I was saying, Trumpism is a renewal of the Confederate mindset. It is a neo-Confederate movement. And people need to understand that that is fundamentally an anti-democratic movement. It is also a theocratic movement, and it is a fascistic movement. And that is what we're looking at right now. And Georgia is one of those situations. It should not be this close. Tons of people have been disenfranchised. Polls have been messed with. They've thrown every roadblock possible in front of voters in Georgia because they understand that things are shifting and that their power is endangered. So what we're watching right now is a neo-Confederate fascistic movement.
Right. I wanted to ask you one more question. I know you have another engagement, another show tonight, but I wanted people to have a sense of, we said theocracy. You have a background as growing up with a theocracy and have some insight and have brought forward to people some of that, how that movement has been a part of, and actually, in my opinion, an integral part actually the central part of the social base and the organized social base for the Trump-Pence regime. But I wonder if you could just comment a bit on this, and then we intend to be doing these shows, both the RNL show and things together with Refuse Fascism over the next period of time, and this merits really getting into it in some depth. But if you could just give our audience tonight, as we're looking at this map and seeing the red states in the Deep South, the Bible Belt, which, as Bob Avakian has pointed out, the revolutionary leader, is also the lynching belt. If you could actually talk some about this theocratic element.
Sure. If people want to take a look at this further after I give a brief little summary of it, they can look up The Cult of the Shining City, which is where my writing focuses on. But one of the things that people don't understand and they need to understand is that fascism needs that theocratic element to work.
Joshua, you are a professor at the College of Charleston, is that correct?
That's correct, of Jewish studies, that's right.
Yeah, of Jewish studies, and also have been a student of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust in particular. But I'd like to actually ask you about how you've seen the parallels with your studies of the Holocaust and against the Jewish people and what is happening today. It's a big question.
Sure.
So not pile on with it.
Let me first of all say, I mean, what historians do is to make comparisons, right? So I know everyone likes to say Godwin's law, you can't compare things to the past or to the Nazis. But of course, the whole reason we study the Holocaust is to make comparisons, nuanced comparisons, also contrasts, to understand the concerns. Because otherwise, the whole thing becomes this sort of sick voyeuristic exercise. We study Nazism and fascism in history to learn from it, and to and to not let things go as far as they did. So to say that we're not in a fascist threat because we don't have a death camp like Auschwitz, well, obviously we're not in 1941 or 42 or 43, but that doesn't mean we don't have fascist movements and other kinds of authoritarian movements threatening us all the time. And we're in a moment now of global authoritarianism and, yes, global fascism, including in the United States, in ways that many, many scholars have talked about. Myself, Samuel Moyn, Rudy Koshar, Richard Bodek, and many, many others have talked about this. Helene Sinreich. What you want to look for with fascism is a constellation of politics that is unique to that movement. You might be missing one or two, but if you see enough of them, you have what to be worried about. So for example, you want to look for something like a cult of a leader, always a male leader who promises to have all solutions through him, and who sort of equates himself in a way that harkens back to Louis XIV, right? That the state is me, that I am the state, and loyalty to the state means loyalty to me personally. You want to look for a political movement that demonizes the free press, because the free press threatens to expose the truth. The Nazis did this with a phrase called Lügenpresse, which means lying press. They kept shouting, "Don't trust the lying press, it can't be trusted." You want to look for a movement that is going to attack unions and labor, which might form a kind of resistance. You want to look for a movement that glorifies violence as an end, but also as a means to an end, that just loves violence, the aesthetic of violence, the beauty of violence. You want to look for a movement that talks about a demonized minority that's the source of all of our society's ills. You want to look for a movement that points and harkens back to some glorious past where things were simpler, where the hierarchies, the social, the racial, and the gender hierarchies were secure. And I could go on, but I think I've made my point that obviously we're seeing all of these things come up, and it doesn't mean, that Trump is Hitler. Everyone is different. Hitler is Hitler, and Trump is Trump, and everyone is themselves. And you don't want to make a gross comparison, but you also don't want to say, well, because it's not Hitler, obviously we have nothing to be worried about. The greatest book in the Holocaust ever written is arguably Chris Browning's Ordinary Men. Chris Browning, by the way, another scholar who has written about this moment in America as a fascist moment, as a fascist threat. But anyway, Chris Browning's Ordinary Men, where he talked about one of the killing squads that killed Jews, and his argument and his proof in the book was these were ordinary men. not ordinary Germans, ordinary men, that we're nothing special in America. We're no different than the Germans or the Hungarians or the Poles. We're human beings, and we're as susceptible to a fascist takeover as anyone else. The idea that we're somehow special, on the contrary, we have a history in America that makes us almost more susceptible, because one of the bases of fascism is ethnic nationalism, the idea that a nation is grounded in a specific racial ethnicity. And that goes back very deep in American roots, as you probably know, going back to the colonial days in early America and so on. That's the reason every time we see a push against immigration in American history, it's never because of the economics of immigration. It wasn't because of jobs. It was because of a fear of a de-whitening of America. The first great protest against migration was against the Irish, because they were considered non-white. Then you have a protest against Jews and Italians in the 1910s and 20s, and now you have today's movement. It's not about jobs. It's about a racial threat. And so I think we have to be awake to that danger. We have to be sensitive and do it in a nuanced, intelligent way. But we have to, above all, not be sanguine. I am not blasé about any of this. This is why we do what we do. This is why we study history, to act. That was a longer answer maybe than you expected, but I hope it was helpful.
No, here's, part of, Joshua, part of, it is one of the issues that we have to deal with in leading a movement like this is while we have a popular slogan, Trump, Pence must go, and in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. But we also have never stopped from the very beginning saying, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. And the name of the organization is Refuse Fascism. That's a complicated thought, and especially so from in a country like this, where people have a lot of mythology that's, some of which began to get publicly undermined this past summer, which is an interesting point. I have just a few points I want to make in response to this. But this public the mythology that this is a society bending towards ever more inclusion and the ending of maybe even going to a post-racial society, which was some of the stuff that was around during the Obama years. But actually this deep, virulent white supremacist strain in America was growing ever more vicious and preparing the ground for Donald Trump to seize that moment. But in this great uprising in the spring, this beautiful rising in response to the murder of George Floyd, you began to see this undermined, where all of a sudden you had politicians talking about white supremacy. So there is quite a bit that can be accomplished through mass struggle. So
I agree, and I would just add to what you say, if I may, just to back up what you say. I read an article recently that talked about the fact that most today recognizes the existence of systemic racism. That's new. That hasn't happened before this year that I know of. That most of America recognizes there's such a thing as systemic racism. That's a huge accomplishment.
And they did that. It is, and they did it because people took to the streets. Now, I just wanted to make 2 points on your point of the constellation of things that comprise fascism. One is just one other element in Germany. I think it was called, and my German is, I don't even speak German, but it was something like Kinder, Küche, and Kirchen, basically children, kitchen, church, which was a very patriarchal view of the role of women, and certainly people didn't. Homosexuals were also rounded up very early in the German regime. That's also a very common and frequent characteristic of fascism, the male supremacy and patriarchy. So I wanted to add that. And the second thing I wanted to speak about in terms of fascism, in our study of this and how we've looked at it, that at the heart of fascism is actually a change in the form of rule. Most of the time, capitalist countries, which is basically what we have all over the world at this point, prefer to rule. The dominant form of rule has been a form of what I would call bourgeois democracy, but democracy for, and I don't say that as a throwaway line, I mean, it's a certain form of democracy for those people who actually make the decisions in society about what gets produced and how it gets produced, those people who are control the economy and all of that, and their political representatives. most of the time that's been the preferred form of rule that has at least a semblance of democratic and civil norms. But fascism actually is a different form of rule in that it dispenses with all of that. It rules much more by, as you were saying, the leader makes the rules, and that gets enforced both by the authority and violence of the state and the violence of the mob.
The last one's a big one. So let me respond to each of your points. So in terms of patriarchy, attacks on sexual deviance as they see it, absolutely central to fascism. The famous Nazi book burning that's been in all those pictures, that was actually the library of a pioneering institute of gender research.
So maybe we can start by, I'm interested in the name of this group, Toward Trump's Hate. Can you talk a little bit about, what you do and how this came about?
So Toward Trump's Hate came about in 2016, right after the election. Victoria Cook, our founder, was looking for other like-minded people who came from the same kind of background as her and came from a traditional Jewish background and were not Trump supporters. And she was looking for people who she could find a community with. And I found her a couple weeks after the election, and so did thousands of other members, and we came together and we've created our own Jewish community. And this community is mostly virtual, but it's a group of Orthodox and Orthodox aligned Jews who are more progressive politically, and we try to address a number of issues and fight the regime that's in power right now, and truly Torah trumps hate, which means that Torah is so much more than hate, and we need to get back to our roots and get back to Torah, because that will bring us back to a lot of these progressive things that we're fighting for.
So you're in Philadelphia. Trump said in the debate, bad things happened in Philadelphia when people were actually trying to record, video of people voting, people standing in line. So what's the mood been like around where you are today, and what's on your mind right now as these returns are coming in?
So I live right outside of Philadelphia, but all day I spent the day at my precinct. I'm actually a Democratic committee person, and I answered questions, and I had all these people coming up to me, and some of them crying because they were so happy that this day had finally come, that they could vote against him and vote for Biden and get rid of fascism. And so many people use the word get rid of fascism, and that was so important. And I know that my precinct had a historical turnout. I know that my county, I live in Montgomery County, and our Democratic county chair said that in 2016 we had a 77% turnout in Montgomery County, and everybody always talks about southeastern Pennsylvania and the suburbs are the route to winning Pennsylvania. We had at least a 90% turnout of the Democrats in Montgomery County. Delaware County was on fire with excitement. My friends who are committee people were posting pictures. I had a friend who had a 3-hour line to get into their polling place to vote because so many people turned out because they were so excited to vote against fascism. And it was inspiring. So I know that I will be focused on getting in the streets and holding our elected officials accountable to make sure that every single vote is counted. And I'm encouraging everybody I know to do the same thing. Get out there and use your outside voice. Use that strength and your power to make sure that every vote is counted. Because I think at the end of the day, if every vote is correctly counted, we have won. I truly believe that we have power in our voice and in our feet. And we say all the time in Toward Trump's Hate, we pray with our feet all the time. So it's important to use that voice. And I truly believe that when we come out in big numbers, I think it's like 3% or 5% of the population, if we come out there and we get into the streets and we use those voices and we come together to use those voices, change will happen. And we did this at the ballot box. Unfortunately, they know they can't win without cheating. And now we have to hold all of these non-fascist political leaders accountable to fight for us and use their voices and their power. So we have to give them the encouragement, but we also have to tell those that are fascists, those who are, you know, in the Trump administration, that we will not allow them to steal this election, that we are going to fight for our democracy, and we haven't given up. We're not going to just sit down and you know, just take it.
So with that, we want to close this week's episode of the RNL show. But before we go, we wanted to play this very special song that was put together by Outer National, which is a revolutionary rock band. And we've played this song on the show before, but it really speaks also to the moment now. And it's called America Goddamn, and which is actually taking off a little bit from the song by Nina Simone, Mississippi Goddamn. And you can hear her voice in the very beginning of the song. So, you know, let's hear that.
Okay, so we're going to be playing America Goddamn, as Luan just said. And this song came out, Outer National put this out right in that moment after George Floyd was murdered by the police. And it really spoke to that deep white supremacy that permeates this society. And it has an applicability now as people confront that half the country voted for Donald Trump. Even as we are now putting our attention to insisting that this election was won by Biden. You cannot overturn this election, Trump-Pence regime, and you know, Refuse Fascism, as we said earlier in the show, is calling people out into the streets this Saturday. And so with that song, we will end the show, and we're putting this up tonight on a Tuesday night. For those who know that we come out every Thursday night, this is a period where we're putting up the show as needed and, in a certain sense, as we can. So what I wanted to say to our audience is stay tuned and check with us at YouTube's The Revcoms to see what we're posting during the week. If you're getting notifications because you subscribed, good. If you're not subscribed, subscribe now so you can see when we're putting new things up. There's going to be playlists that get put together with some of the interviews we've done over the last week or two. And then a week from Thursday, we will likely have the next show, but maybe we'll put it up early depending on development. So you have to stay tuned to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. So for myself and for Luan, we'll see you soon.
Slavery hasn't changed, my friend. It's just adopted a new face.
It's in the very fabric of American society. Goddamn! I couldn't stand it.
Goddamn! I'm treated like a piece of shit. Goddamn! I'm no more than a